Cinderella.
Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a beautiful and kind-hearted girl named Cinderella. She had a loving family, but her mother passed away when she was very young. Her father, wanting to give her a mother's love, remarried a woman who had 2 daughters of her own. At first, they seemed kind, but after her father also passed away, their true nature was revealed. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were cruel and selfish. They treated her like a servant, making her do all the household chores from dawn until night. She wore old, ragged clothes and slept near the fireplace, which left her covered in cinders. Because of this, people called her Cinderella. And despite her hardships, she remained kind and never lost hope. One day, an exciting announcement came from the royal palace. The king was hosting a grand ball, and all the young ladies of the kingdom were invited. The prince was searching for a bride, and he would choose one among the guests. Cinderella's stepsisters were thrilled and spent days preparing their finest dresses. Cinderella, too, wished to go, but her stepmother laughed cruelly. "You? Go to the ball. Look at yourself. A servant like you could never stand before the prince." To make sure Cinderella couldn't go, her stepmother gave her even more work to do. On the night of the ball, the stepmother and stepsisters left in their elegant gowns, leaving Cinderella alone. Overwhelmed with sadness, she sat in the kitchen and wept. At that moment, a shimmering light appeared, and a kind old woman stood before her. "Why are you crying, my dear?" It was her fairy godmother. Cinderella explained her sorrow, and the fairy godmother smiled gently. "Don't worry, my child. I will send you to the ball." With a wave of her wand, she transformed a pumpkin into a golden carriage, mice into majestic horses, and lizards into loyal footmen. Finally, Cinderella's tattered dress turned into a dazzling blue gown, and sparkling glass slippers appeared on her feet. "But remember," the fairy godmother warned, "the magic will end at midnight. You must return before then." An overjoyed Cinderella rode the golden carriage to the palace. When she arrived, everyone was mesmerized by her beauty. No one recognized her, and the prince was immediately captivated. He approached her, took her hand, and they danced together all night. Time flew by, and before she knew it, the clock began striking midnight. Cinderella gasped and rushed away. As she ran down the palace steps, one of her glass slippers slipped off, but she couldn't stop. She fled before the magic wore off, and once outside the palace gates, she found herself in her old rags once more. The next day, the prince set out to find the mysterious girl who had left behind the glass slipper. He traveled throughout the kingdom, searching for the one whose foot would perfectly fit the shoe. Many ladies tried to squeeze their feet into it, but none succeeded. Finally, the prince arrived at Cinderella's house. The stepsisters desperately tried to fit their feet into the glass slipper, but it was no use. When Cinderella asked if she could try, her stepmother protested, but the prince's servant allowed her to do so. To everyone's astonishment, the slipper fit her perfectly. Cinderella then took out the other glass slipper from her pocket, proving she was the one the prince was looking for. The prince was overjoyed and took Cinderella back to the palace. Soon, they were married in a grand wedding, and Cinderella became a kind and beloved queen. She forgave those who had wronged her and lived happily ever after. Cinderella's kindness and perseverance, even in the face of hardship, led her to happiness. This story teaches us that no matter how difficult life may seem, Staying kind and hopeful will always bring good things in the end.
The Mermaid Princess.
Once upon a time, in the deep and vast ocean, there lived a beautiful mermaid princess. She was a lovely mermaid with long hair, and whenever she sang, all the sea creatures would listen intently to her voice. However, the mermaid princess was always curious about the human world. One day, she swam up to the surface of the sea and saw a prince. He was on a ship, laughing brightly and dancing. The mermaid princess was captivated by his warm smile. Suddenly, a storm broke out and the prince's ship capsized. The mermaid princess quickly swam to his rescue and brought him to shore. Before the prince opened his eyes, the sound of people approaching could be heard from afar. The mermaid princess swiftly hid beneath the waves, and the prince, believing that the person who saved him was a princess from a nearby castle, never knew it was her. The mermaid princess, longing to be with the prince, went to the sea witch. The witch agreed to make her human in exchange for the mermaid prince's beautiful voice. The princess gladly gave up her voice, but she couldn't become human. To truly become human, the power of true love was needed. The prince welcomed the voiceless mermaid princess kindly, but he still believed that the person who had saved him was the princess from the castle, with whom he had promised to marry. Though the mermaid princess was sad, just being able to stay close to him and watch over him made her happy. Then, the night before the wedding, a grand festival was held at the castle. The mermaid princess sat quietly, wishing for the prince's happiness. Suddenly, like magic, her beautiful voice returned. "Prince, I am the one who saved you." The prince was shocked and looked at the mermaid princess. Only then did he realize that he had been deeply in love with her from the very first moment they met. "Now I understand. The one I truly loved was you." The prince held a magnificent wedding, and he married the mermaid princess. She became human, and they lived happily ever after. This story teaches us that true feelings always get through, and when we value ourselves, we can become even happier. If you keep moving toward your dreams without giving up, good things will come, and wonderful endings are waiting for you.
Snow White.
Once upon a time, in a beautiful kingdom deep in the forest, there lived a kind and lovely princess named Snow White. She had skin as white as snow, hair as black as the night sky, and lips as red as a rose. But more than her beauty, Snow White had a heart full of kindness and warmth. One day, the queen passed away, and the king remarried a new queen. This new queen was very beautiful, but her heart was filled with jealousy and greed. She owned a magic mirror, and every day she would ask it, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror always answered, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." However, as time passed, Snow White grew more and more beautiful. One day, when the queen asked the mirror the same question, it replied, "You are beautiful, my queen, but the fairest of them all is now Snow White." The queen was furious. Overcome with jealousy, she decided to get rid of Snow White. She ordered a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and make sure she never returned. But the kind huntsman could not harm the innocent princess. Instead, he told her to run far away into the deep forest and never return. Snow White, frightened and alone, wandered through the dark woods until she found a small cottage. Carefully, she opened the door and stepped inside. Inside the cottage, there were 7 tiny beds lined up in a row. Feeling exhausted, Snow White lay down on one of the beds and fell into a deep sleep. This cottage belonged to 7 dwarfs who returned home that evening to find the sleeping princess. They were surprised at first, but felt sorry for her when she told them her story. The kind dwarfs welcomed Snow White into their home, and she happily lived with them, helping with chores and preparing meals. Meanwhile, the queen once again asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You are beautiful, my queen, but Snow White, who lives with the 7 dwarfs, is now the fairest of them all." The queen was filled with rage and decided to take matters into her own hands. She disguised herself as an old woman and made a poisoned apple. Then she traveled to the dwarf's cottage and knocked on the door. "Dear child, would you like to taste this delicious apple?" she said in a gentle voice. At first, Snow White hesitated, but when she saw the old woman take a bite from one side, she thought it must be safe. As soon as she took a bite, Snow White collapsed to the ground. That evening, when the dwarfs returned home, they found Snow White lying motionless on the floor. No matter how hard they tried, she would not wake up. Saddened, they could not bear to bury her, so they placed her in a beautiful glass coffin and watched over her every day. One day, a prince from a nearby kingdom happened to pass through the forest. When he saw Snow White lying in the glass coffin, he was captivated by her beauty and purity. He carefully opened the coffin and lifted her up. At that moment, a piece of the poisoned apple fell from Snow White's mouth. Suddenly, her eyes fluttered open, and she woke up. The dwarfs and the prince were overjoyed. The prince asked Snow White to come with him to his kingdom and live happily ever after. Snow White thanked the dwarfs for their kindness and bid them farewell. Then she rode off with the prince to his castle, where they lived happily ever after. This story teaches us that true beauty comes from kindness and a pure heart. It also shows that jealousy and greed can lead to bad consequences. Most importantly, when we are kind to others, we will always find friends who care for us.
Rapunzel.
Once upon a time, in a deep forest, there was a very tall tower. In that tower lived a beautiful girl named Rapunzel. She had golden long hair, and her hair had magical powers. When she sang, it could heal the sick and restore youth. Upon discovering this, the witch Gothel locked Rapunzel in the tower. The witch made sure no one could enter the tower, and only she could visit Rapunzel. Every day, the witch would shout below the tower, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then Rapunzel would let her long hair down the window, and the witch would climb up it. Rapunzel was very curious about the outside world. However, the witch would warn her, the outside world is a dangerous place. There are bad people everywhere. The safest place for you is here. So Rapunzel spent all her time in the tower, singing, drawing pictures, and gazing at the sky. One day, a prince was riding through the forest and accidentally discovered the tall tower. He was curious and watched from afar. At that moment, the witch appeared and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then the long hair came down and the witch climbed up it. The prince was fascinated by this and decided to try it when the witch had left. Carefully, he called from below the tower, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel was startled. It was a voice she hadn't heard before. But curious, she let down her hair. The prince climbed up and met Rapunzel. Rapunzel was meeting a stranger for the first time. The prince told her about the beauty of the outside world, how the birds sang in the forest, the flowers bloomed, and the rivers sparkled. Rapunzel was eager to go, but she was afraid of the witch. But the prince gave her courage. "You shouldn't be locked in this tower alone. Let's escape and live freely together." Rapunzel hesitated, but eventually decided. The next night, the prince promised to bring a strong rope to help her escape. However, that evening, the witch noticed something was different about Rapunzel's expression. "Have you met someone?" the witch asked suspiciously. Rapunzel accidentally replied, "The prince is going to take me away." The witch became angry and cut off Rapunzel's long hair. Then she sent Rapunzel far away. That night, when the prince came to the tower, the witch was waiting instead of Rapunzel. The prince was shocked, and the witch attacked him. He ran into the forest, but he was blinded by thorns. The prince wandered the forest for a long time, unable to see. One day, he heard Rapunzel singing from somewhere. He followed the sound and found her. When Rapunzel saw the prince, she cried. She wiped his tears, and something amazing happened. Rapunzel's tears healed the prince's eyes. He could see again. The prince and Rapunzel returned to the castle together. Rapunzel saw the wide world for the first time. The blue sky, the sparkling river, and the beautiful flowers, all of it was wonderful and new. From then on, Rapunzel and the prince lived happily ever after. Rapunzel was initially afraid of the outside world, but she gathered courage to step into a new world. Sometimes new things can be scary, but with courage, a wider and more beautiful world awaits. Also, true love and a kind heart can create miracles. Never forget that.
Sleeping Beauty.
Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, a kind king and queen lived. They had wished for a child for a long time, and one day, their wish came true. A beautiful princess was born. The king and queen were overjoyed, and the entire kingdom celebrated the princess' birth. To commemorate the occasion, the king and queen held a grand feast. Nobles, commoners, and even 3 fairies with magical powers were invited. The fairies blessed the princess with special gifts. The first fairy said, "The princess will be the most beautiful person in the world." The second fairy said, "She will be kind and have a good heart." But before the third fairy could give her blessing, the room suddenly darkened. A cold wind blew through the castle, and a terrifying sorceress dressed in a black cloak appeared. She glared at the king and queen and spoke with a furious voice. "How dare you not invite me to this feast? You will regret your mistake." Then she cast a dreadful curse upon the princess. On her 16th birthday, she will prick her finger on a spinning wheel spindle and fall into a deep sleep, and she will never wake up. The king and queen gasped in fear. Just then, the third fairy, who had not yet given her blessing, stepped forward. "I cannot undo the curse completely, but I can change it slightly," she said, waving her wand. "The princess will indeed fall into a deep sleep, but she will not sleep forever. She will wake up when she receives a touch of warmth and kindness." To protect the princess, the king ordered that all spinning wheels in the kingdom be destroyed. As time passed, the princess grew into a beautiful and kind young girl. Yet no one knew what would happen on her 16th birthday. On the day of the princess' 16th birthday, the king and queen prepared a magnificent celebration. But out of curiosity, the princess wandered around the castle and discovered an old tower with a small hidden room. Inside, she saw an elderly woman spinning thread on a wheel. "Would you like to try spinning, dear princess?" the woman asked. The princess, fascinated, reached out to touch the wheel. The moment her finger touched the spindle, she fell to the floor and slipped into a deep sleep. The king and queen were heartbroken. The third fairy gently placed the princess on a comfortable bed and said, "The princess will awaken when she receives warmth from a kind heart. Until then, I will put the entire kingdom to sleep with her." With a wave of her wand, the fairy cast a spell, and soon the king, queen, servants, and all the people in the kingdom fell into a deep slumber. Years passed, and the kingdom was slowly forgotten. People only spoke of an enchanted kingdom hidden deep within the forest. One day, a brave prince heard this tale and decided to seek out the sleeping princess. He journeyed through the dangerous forest, climbed over the tall castle walls, and finally found the princess room. There, he saw her lying peacefully on the bed. The prince gazed at the princess and hoped she would wake up. He gently took her hand and spoke in a warm voice. "Princess, it is time to wake up." At that moment, the magic broke, and the princess' eyes slowly fluttered open. She looked at the prince and smiled brightly. At the same time, the king, queen, and everyone in the kingdom woke up. Over time, the princess and the prince became close friends. They spent much time together, understanding and supporting one another. Eventually, they fell in love and had a grand wedding. They lived happily ever after. This story teaches us that love and hope can overcome any hardship. Although the princess was asleep for a long time, she eventually woke up and started a new life. We should remember that even in difficult times, good things will come if we do not give up. And when we share kindness with others, love grows even stronger.
Beauty and the Beast.
Once upon a time, in a quiet and peaceful village, there lived a beautiful young girl named Belle. Belle was not only lovely on the outside, but also kind and gentle on the inside. She was different from the other villagers. While most people like to gossip in the marketplace and show off fancy clothes, Belle loved to read. She spent her days at the little bookshop, diving into stories about brave heroes, magical lands, and true love. Belle's father was an inventor. He was a little quirky but very kind, and he loved Belle dearly. One day, he set off on a journey to present one of his inventions in a distant town. But along the way, he lost his way and wandered deep into a dark forest. After walking for hours, he stumbled upon an old, mysterious castle hidden among the trees. The castle looked gloomy and cold, but he had nowhere else to go. Inside the castle, everything was silent. As he walked through the grand halls, he saw a beautiful rose in the garden. Thinking of Belle, he picked one for her. But suddenly, a fierce beast appeared. The beast roared with anger. The castle belonged to him, and no one was allowed to take anything. The beast locked Belle's father in the dungeon for trespassing and stealing. When Belle realized her father hadn't returned, she went searching for him. She found the castle, and when she learned what had happened, she bravely offered to stay in her father's place. The beast was surprised by her courage and agreed to let her take his place. At first, life in the castle was lonely and strange. The beast was rough and distant, but Belle soon began to notice something different. Behind his scary appearance was someone who was trying to be kind. The beast wasn't cruel. He was just sad and maybe even afraid. The castle's enchanted servants, who had been turned into objects like a teapot, clock, and candlestick by a powerful spell, welcomed Belle warmly. They too hoped she might be the one to break the curse. Over time, Belle and the Beast spent more and more time together. They read books, walked through the gardens, and learned about each other. Belle saw the kindness and warmth hidden inside the Beast, and the Beast began to smile more, laugh, and even hope. He had never felt anything like this before, but Belle still missed her father. When the Beast saw how much she longed to see him, he let her go. Even though it broke his heart, he knew it was the right thing to do. Belle returned home and helped her father recover. But when she heard that the villagers were marching to the castle to hurt the Beast, she rushed back. She found the Beast weak and hurt. She held him close and whispered how much she cared for him. She realized she truly loved him, not because he had changed, but because she had seen who he really was all along. At that very moment, the curse was lifted. A swirl of golden light surrounded the castle, and the Beast transformed into a handsome prince. The castle became bright and beautiful again, and all the enchanted servants turned back into people. Belle and the prince stood together holding hands, their hearts full of love. They lived happily ever after, in a castle filled with laughter, kindness, and magic. True beauty is not found in appearances, but in the heart. When we take the time to understand and care for others, we discover that love and kindness have the power to break even the strongest curse.
Kongji and Patji.
Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a kind and beautiful girl named Kongji. She lost her mother at a young age and lived alone with her father. Wanting Kongji to have a family, her father remarried, and her stepmother came to live with them, bringing her own daughter, Patji. At first, Kongji was happy to have a new family, but soon, her stepmother and Patji began to mistreat her. Her stepmother forced Kongji to do all the household chores, while Patji wore pretty clothes and played all day. From dawn till late at night, Kongji had to work tirelessly without any rest. One day, her stepmother gave her a broken jar and ordered her to fill it with water. Kongji tried many times to fetch water from the well, but it kept leaking out. No matter how hard she tried, the jar would not fill, and she became tearful with frustration. At that moment, a small toad hopped over and used its body to plug the hole in the jar. Thanks to the toad's help, Kongji was able to complete the task. However, her stepmother soon assigned her another impossible job. This time, she was told to plant rice in a large field all by herself. Though it was too much for one person, Kongji did not give up and worked as hard as she could. Then, out of nowhere, a flock of sparrows flew down and began planting the rice with their beaks. With their help, the task was finished quickly. But the stepmother was still not satisfied. She mixed rice and barley together and told Kongji to sort them all out. With her small hands, how could she possibly finish such a task? Kongji sighed, feeling helpless. Just then, a group of small mice appeared and quickly separated the rice from the barley. With their help, Kongji successfully completed the chore. One day, news spread that a grand feast was being held in the village. The stepmother dressed Patji in beautiful clothes and took her to the feast, leaving Kongji behind with piles of housework. Heartbroken, Kongji wept. At that moment, a fairy descended from the sky and appeared before her. The fairy gave Kongji a lovely silk dress and a pair of shining pearl-like shoes, telling her to go to the feast. Overjoyed, Kongji hurried to the event. At the feast, she looked so beautiful that everyone admired her. However, as she ran to the feast in excitement, One of her shoes slipped off and fell into a stream. The lost shoe was later found by the village governor. He decided to find the owner of the shoe, searching throughout the village. However, no one's foot fit the shoe. Finally, Kongji tried it on, and it fit her perfectly. The governor, seeing Kongji's kind and gentle heart, immediately fell in love with her and made her his wife. They lived happily ever after. Meanwhile, Kongji's wicked stepmother and Patji received punishment for their cruelty and were never able to do harm again. This story teaches us that kindness and hard work will always be rewarded, while those who do evil will eventually face the consequences of their actions.
Did you enjoy today's story? Now it's time to go to Dreamland. See you again next time.